Right, welcome to this week's edition of the Old Parachute Podcast, a podcast with a variety of guests from all walks of life, with one of the main goals of raising awareness for mental health among military veterans and the emergency services communities. And it is a great pleasure today to introduce this week's guest, former paratrooper, former SAS, and founder of Ronin Concepts, Mr. John Graham. How you doing, pal? All right?
Good, thank you. Yeah, pleasure to get a pretty good introduction there. I don't know whether I deserve it or not.
Well, we'll see. We'll let the viewers be the judge of that.
Exactly.
No, thank you very much for taking the time to come on. I know you're busy with kind of running in the close protection courses and stuff like that. And as you just kind of alluded to there off air, obviously a spike in numbers due to various things, which we'll probably come on to later down the line. But what I like to do with all the podcasts is I like to start at the beginning and get a bit of a background about the person, about the guest, kind of where they grew up, what they were like as a kid through school, and ultimately what led them on to the kind of route, and in your case, joining the mighty Parachute Regiment back in the day. So yeah, over to you, John.
Yeah. Well, I pretty checkered background really. I started life in what is now Zimbabwe. I was there when it was Rhodesia, and there's a funny little story later on about being drafted into the Rhodesian Light Infantry. It didn't happen because I was with the Paras, but anyway, way back. I was just a kid when we left. My parents left after the war, and my father fought in World War II, and they left UK and set up in what was then Rhodesia, a thriving African state, and set up business. So he had a really successful building operation out there, and unfortunately he got ill from a cerebral thrombosis. We were very young, and he eventually died when he was 40, but it was down to a closed head injury that occurred in Italy. He was El Alamein, Anzio, etc. Those kind of campaigns, and had a blast injury, a closed head injury, and was in a coma for maybe 3 months. Left. Bunged off with an Italian family, until the troops fought through, and then came back for him. 3 months later.
Wow.
Stabilized, bunged him off with her. But my old mum, bless her heart, she always said that was down to the war. That sort of head trauma had caused strokes early on in life, but who knows? So, yeah. Very young in Newcastle. It was a great place. It was a different time and space from the youth today. Yes, there was a little bit of violence, but nothing like today. Nowhere near today. It was a post-war. I think I was born 9 years after World War II, and so I'm probably older than God now, and it was a time when I was a bit traumatized from losing my dad, whether it was conscious or unconscious thing. I didn't get on well at school too well. I left when I was 14 and a half. But I think my sort of career was well sort of established while I was at school. When I was 11, I became an ABA boxer. And in them days, kids could fight. So we did tournaments all over the north and northeast, 11 to 13. And it was a case of fighting all over the Colour Coats, Whitley Bay, these Shields Road, Shields, these type of places in Newcastle also. And so I could use my hands. And but when I was kind of 10 and a half, I got battered. It's the first time I've ever been battered in my life, and the last. And I kept getting up, kept getting battered to the floor, kept getting up, kept getting battered to the floor. Eventually, this guy got up and he said, "You've got plenty of guts, son. But he was an older guy, but he was the same size as me, so I thought I could take him on. And he said, you should learn how to fight. And I did. I started boxing, joined the West End Boys Club. And school, not long after, I was pretty mild-mannered, just like I am now, pretty mild-mannered. And I didn't have a lot of friends. I had a handful of good friends. I didn't run with a crowd. Much preferred to be an individual. I hung around with girls a lot. It wasn't a sexual thing at that time, but I just had lots of girlfriends, if you know what I mean, and a couple of blokes friends. And I got a reputation for a bit of a bully basher. You know, I'd identify where bullies were coming into play, and I'd bushwhack them from a flank. You know, I didn't even offer a mount. I just run up and give them a left hook. You know, and I just couldn't give a shit how big they were, because I knew fast hands, even at that early stage, was the way to go. And soon learned that your sort of bully boys were pretty much, you know, cowardly characters.
Absolutely.
And they didn't come back, you know. So that was pretty weird. But I left. I looked around. I went from job to job. Unlike today, you know, I went from job to job, unsettled. You know, I did everything from foundry worker to working in a factory, working in warehouses, and all kinds of different. But just left. There was a job. Left that job. There was another job. Unlike today, I looked around and I got a job at the University Theatre as a assistant stage manager, and I fancied myself as an actor, you know. And in the days when Steve McQueen etc. were cutting around in Bullet, you know, and I thought that's me, you know, and I was the worst actor in the world, and still am, and. But I went to the council because they were handing out grants, and I said, you know, can I get a grant? And they said, well, yeah. So they put me into the Birmingham School of Speech and Drama, and I lasted a year there. I met a guy called Dirk Bogard. You know, he was an old actor, and he was in the Paras. He was attached to the Paras as a signaller.
Oh wow!
And so I think he was on some kind of battle with a para-reg at that time, Plymouth Hall Bridge or something like that. And he was one of the principals of the school. And we just met him, and he started telling me about the Parachute Regiment. So the Parachute Regiment found me. You know, I was looking, and the Parachute Regiment found me. You know, that's the way I've always spun it and looked at it when I look back. So I joined up, went back to Newcastle, and not initially the Paras. He told me about the Paras. I didn't even know they had red berets at the time. You know, this was just a story that this guy was telling me, this old guy was telling me. And I went back to Newcastle, went to this Durham Light Infantry guy who was in the recruiting office when they had him in them days. And he said, "Oh, Harry lad, you know, come in, you know, join the Durham Light Infantry, you know." And I said, "No." I actually said to him, I mean, I was still a kid. I said, "I want to join the SAS," and he started laughing at me because all I knew about the SAS was the old Commando comics. You know, have you ever seen those? They were little, ran by DC Comics. It was the British version of DC Comics at the time, and it was you know, there was just drawing stories of World War II SAS, and I said, you know, I want to join the SAS. He started laughing. He said, no, you got to do 3 years in a unit before you can go do selection. He said, join the Durham Light Infantry. You know, and he sat there and he's burying that, and I thought, no, maybe not. And I was walked out the door, and then I saw a cardboard cutout, man-sized cardboard cutout of a paratrooper on the way out, with red beret, Denison smock, denims, puttees, boots, and a parachute billowing in the background carrying a GPMG. And I said, what about this unit? And he went, no, you want to join them, mate? They're all fucking nutters, you know? And I said,
True story.
yeah. And I said, well, it's either that or nothing, you know? And he said, okay. And he signed me off, and off I went, you know? That was it. So that was my introduction to the Parachute Regiment.
Yeah, they kind of they do that with the army careers officers, don't they? I remember when I go, because when I joined in the late 90s, they still had the army careers officers. They've all gone now, I think. But yeah, I kind of walked in there, and it was a grenadier guard behind the counter. Because I'm 6'2" and a big lad, I was like, nah, not a chance in hell. It's the Parachute Regiment for me, and kind of off I went at 17. So yeah, so how old were you? Was you sort of 17, 18 at this time, or was you a bit older?
I was a little bit older. I was sort of 18.
Yeah.
18, yeah. 18 pushing 19, almost 19. I was 19 by the time I was in, but by the time I passed, you know.
Down to older shot, not long after that, and start of training, right?
Yeah, and just had a fantastic time, you know.
How did you find training? Because it's a mixed bag with training, and it's some people. I've had all sorts of it's a mixed bag. Some people really loved training. I think they're a bit odd. And then there's a lot of people that kind of found it tough, and I found it tough, but I found it enjoyable at the same time. What about yourself? How did you find it?
Yeah, I don't think I was under any illusions, you know. I knew it was, but I didn't know what to expect, to be honest. Not like many of them. I mean, we didn't have the media coverage we have today. So short of Alan Ladd in the Red Beret, you know, movie, I hadn't seen or heard of the Parachute Regiment. So when I went there, it was just a unit. You know, I didn't know about the army. I didn't know about any other units. You know, soon got to know about other units, but and I just trogged on through, tired all the time, and just kept at it. You know, it was hard. It was hard, but it always looked like it was harder for somebody else. You know, there was always somebody dropping by the wayside, and that gave me strength. You know, I think that's psychologically sometimes it's the way it goes. You know, and as long as I'm not injured, I'll just keep going, and I did, and that was
a lot of people as they go through, they do get the injuries, don't they? It is hard. Parachute regiments, you know, infamously hard, and a lot of people do fall by the wayside. But if you can get through training, usually without injury tends to be a lot of the setback. You get the people that quit because men bust enough, or they talk themselves out of it. But generally speaking, if you get through injury free, a lot of people can get through, can't they? But injuries are the setback usually.
I mean, and it's, you know, they're talking now of shortening the training time.
Really?
Depot. For Parachute Regiment and Marines, which seems, I read an article in the Times, and for whatever reason, you know, saving money, whatever, but it's going to be the opposite because you're going to get more injuries. I just remember, you know, I was never the fittest guy when I wasn't the fittest guy when I joined. I was lean, you know, but I hadn't done much training. I didn't know to do much training, you know. I wasn't advised to do any kind of training. As soon as I got there, it was slow for me at the time. It was a slow build up. It was a slow, steady build up, you know. And I wasn't subject to some of the horror stories I've heard from people in the depot, you know. You know, most of the screws were really good. They were just iconic. They were older, obviously, and they seemed to know everything about everything, you know. a different generation now. You get more. You're getting more sort of, people join today and they know a lot. They train a lot, and they're pretty a different animal.
Yeah, absolutely. I think they've gone away from, there's a guy out there, it's called Coach Mike Chadwick, and he's kind of altered training because of the amount of injuries of chucking boots on young 17-year-old lads and chucking a burger on the back. That's the way it was. It's the way it was when I joined, as it was.
That's right. Yeah.
There was a lot of injuries, a lot of
that was
stress
never
fractures.
good. That was never good. Yeah.
So what he's tried to do now is build them up muscular, and like get them in the gym when they're younger, and build muscle around the kind of, and it's proven to prevent the injuries. So there are progressions in the training for the right reasons, because injuries.
Yeah.
The injuries were part and parcel,
Yeah. And then it was the Northern Ireland slog when I was in trips abroad, mainly the Far East jungle. And jungle was a big thing in them days. So it was the jungle, come back, Northern Ireland. Jungle, come back, Northern Ireland. You know? And sort of did a couple of years in and out with Parachute Regiment, and learned some.
So how long would you have been in before the Falklands kicked off then?
When I was 27.
So in a bit then.
Yeah. So I'd been in a few years, from 19 to 27, basically. So I was 27, ran a full screw when I went out there. I'd been waiting for a chance at selection for a few years, but I had a few regimental entries. I was quite insubordinate, to say the least. And in them days, like I did, I got 28 days for insubordination to a lance corporal.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, that'll do it.
1979.
I ended up with I got 7 days kind of restriction of privileges for threatening to chin my platoon commander on a R&R kind of adventure training break. Not my finest moment, but in my defense, he was a bit of a dick. But I shouldn't have probably done what I did, but it is what it is.
Yeah. But it was strange. It was strange that the same guy, not long after, when was it? Well, it was a few years after 84 when I did selection. Years later, I came back to Airborne Forces Day. I thought I was still in at the time. And this guy sort of came up to me, and I said, "All right, mate, how you doing?" I don't carry grudges, never have. He says, "Me and you all right?" I said, "What do you mean, all right?" He said, no problems." I said, "No. What are you talking about?" And he said, "Well, because of me, you did 28 days in Berlin." And I said, "I forgot about it the day I got out, mate." I forgot about it the day I left the Nick.
Yeah.
And I said, "Why?" And he said, "I said, why are you asking?" And he said, "It's just worried me all these years that you were going to come up at some point, when I wasn't expecting it."
Yeah, well,
it's weird perception of people, isn't it? Weird perception.
Yeah, it is, and people do hold grudges, but that's the way it is. I believe in. Look, if you have a disagreement with someone, and Power Edge is famous for that. I've had disagreements with people. You've had a bit of a punch up, bloody nose, bust lip, and then you've gone and had a pint, and then it's like it's never happened. The generations of today find that a little bit difficult to get the head round. They're like, well, why are you talking to him? You've had a fight with him, and you're like, well, that's just the way things got sorted out, didn't they? And then
yeah.
Crazy. So I wanted to talk about obviously the Falklands. If you're happy to talk about that, you obviously you went down south. Sure. You was 2 para, is that right?
2 para, yeah.
Great battalion.
Loved it.
So you went down south and obviously would have fought at Goosegreen. And how was the whole Falklands thing? Because that was kind of a new thing for your generation. Obviously, the Northern Ireland tours and the rotations through the jungle. But obviously, when you got wind of the Falklands, was it kind of, knowing paratroopers like I do, I would suspect it was like, right, rearing to go. But obviously, there's going to be that element of kind of dauntingness behind it, that human nature to be a bit fearful. But how did the reaction to it when you found out you was going down south?
Well, it was, first of all, people thought it was the Falkland Islands was somewhere north of Scotland. People trying to work out where it was. And
Yeah.
and to be fair, we just had a really bad tour in Northern Ireland, a place called Ballykinler. I don't know whether you're aware of Ballykinler.
Yeah.
And that was our FOB for a deployment all over the province. By that time, I was in a patrol platoon, so I did most of my time in the sticks in South Armagh, and the rifle companies were in Newry, Crossmaglen, those kind of places. On that tour, we lost maybe 25 blokes. One of them, and the Pyro lost close to 15 dead and wounded. Throughout that tour from Parachute engagements, and one particular event, Warren Point, which was a decision by a young officer in the ops room to drive. The Marines had insisted. We took over from the Marines at the time, and the Marines insisted that you have to fly into Newry. Don't use that road. And they warned us not to use the road, and was overridden by the Paratrooper captain in the ops room. And so they loaded up on 4-tonners and went towards Newry, and that's when they were ambushed. Explosive ambush, killing 16 people, 16, 18 people. There was a double ambush. The initial ambush, and then the QRF came in. Apart from some from Newry, some coming in from air, and there was a secondary bomb went off when the helicopter landed, so taking out a few people there. So it was a good ambush. Ambush is the kill, But that's the great. People die in war. That's it. And the troubles was a war. It was of attrition on both sides, and the sadness really was that a lot of the guys in A company at the time were too young to go on the ground. You had to be 18 to go on the ground, but they were 17 and a half, and they were allowed to stag on in the sangers, So that was going to, quite a few of them, that was going to be their task, straight from the depot,
Wow.
And so that was a big chunk out of the battalion, So we'd and that tour finished in 80, and not long after
79, 80, yeah, and then obviously not long after that,
79,
Falklands,
81, and then straight off the Falklands. So the feeling was it was kind of muted. There's no cheering. Nobody wasn't going to go. They had stowaways and all kinds of stowaways from the depot staff stowing away on the ship who got away with it,
Right.
so they could be part of it and ended up with a section. And there was a warning went out the sort of in the days before, the weekend before we left, by the 2IC Keebles at the time. And he got the battalion out and he warned the battalion, if there's one case of violence, one case of drunkenness, they won't be going with us on Monday, or whichever would, I can't remember the day we went, but they threatened the battalion with not taking them to war. It's the it's the most quiet. It's the most quiet night Aldershot's ever had. You know.
Wow. Yeah, well, that's just the mentality of kind of paratroopers again, and I remember very, very different. Obviously, I'm not comparing to the Falklands, but we got the call to go to Sierra Leone in like 2000, and we were on leave, and it were like wacky races for guys trying to get back to Colchester to get on the coach and go. And even as the coach was pulling out, there were guys pulling into camp like, "Oh no, I've missed it," you know. And I was very lucky that I made it back. And so it's that mentality through the generations of like that. To war, so why would you not?
Yeah. And last year you were Sierra Leone because Lee, my son, was on Sierra Leone.
Well, I was obviously two para, and we had a company attached to one para because
right,
one of their
he
companies.
was
So,
one para at the time. Yeah.
Yeah, we were before the actual main incident. So we went out there, and I think about 4 months later was the infamous kind of incident where one para support and SF. Yeah, we were the kind of bit before that, and had come home. I'm always like straight down the line when I tell them Sierra Leone. I don't want to appear like a Walt, but no, we were a bit before. But again, it was the uncertainty. We didn't know what to expect, you know. And obviously same with kicked off in a big way, didn't it?
Yeah. But that was quite an event in my life, Sierra Leone. I wasn't there. Obviously, I was out by then, and it was, my troop that did the infiltration on the ground. You know, I was like, I mean, you can't be everywhere, can you? Yeah. And my son was on was with the one para team, you know, the one para combat team, and it was a kind of mixture of a dad of jealousy and a dad. I've never been worried about him, you know, because he is good. He was good when he was in, and I was never sort of worried about him in a combat situation. I think if he got whacked, it's going to be more bad luck than judgment, you know. So that was quite a time for me. I was on the phone straight away. So I said, he was on the phone straight away when he got back, you know, telling me about what was happening, you know, and a couple of, good ditties, for instance.
Yeah.
They dropped him off in a swamp, you know, and he was coming off up to his waist in water with his section. He had a sniper section, and they were taking fire. And he was like, fuck me, Dad! I thought it was in Da Nang or somewhere, you know, climbing out of the swamp onto the ground.
That whole incident, that whole incident with one para support in 2-2 was what created and why SFSG was formed, because Hereford were that impressed by one para on that thing that they were like, right, we could do with SFSG, and then obviously SFSG was formed off the back of that. So obviously Parage did the goods and proved that as you'd expect from Parage, you know. So yeah, obviously going back, step back. Obviously the Falklands War. Like, I'm not going to pry. I don't want to. Some people want to talk about it. Some people don't.
No, we can.
So talk me through kind of your involvement. I've had some guys on from Free Para that were on Longdon. I've had a couple of guys I think that were two para, or I've got a few people that were lined up that you will probably know actually. Steve Taylor being one of them. He was he was two para, Warren Point and
I know.
Talk me through your involvement, as much and as little as you like.
Well, we were a patrol company at the time, and so patrol company at the time was the sort of forerunners to the new Pathfinder unit that was thrown together. You know, the patrol companies throughout 1, 2, and 3 para at the time, the early days, you know, they kept pushing for these infiltration skills for the battalion. Looking back at the history of Para, just like they had the Pathfinder during the war doing a great job, and we sort of emulated that in as far as being the eyes and ears of the battalion, which led on to a more composite unit, which was the Pathfinders, and so we were, and basically that was our task in the Falkland Islands. We were the forward reconnaissance. There was nobody else forward than us than the Argentinians or the regiment. So we were pushed ahead of the battalion. We landed at this Blue Beach, it was called, at night. It was supposed to be manned by an SBS patrol who never made it, and they were going to give us the green light, or the red light. A red light being it's going to be opposed. Yeah. So these landing crafts with two para landed at night. The tailgates going down. Everybody off the boats at night, not knowing what to expect. Whether it was going to be opposed or unopposed. So arsehole going sixpence, half a crown, and it was unopposed, obviously. So once we got organised, started moving up to Sussex Mountains in the dark, the famous battalion snake with us at the head, and I was late because one of my guys, Kev, fell into the drink, and we had to get him out. It was winter, it was winter, it was cold, so we had to get him changed, particularly get the feet changed because he was shivering and potentially going down. So we had a really quick change, particularly the socks. We had a long way to go, and particularly patrols. They go twice as far in reconnaissance and back, ambush back, which is what we found out as we went. So it fit really important to a patrol company. Got on the road again. The rest of the patrols were way ahead of us, way ahead of the battalion, and we had to catch up. So head down, arse up in the dark, pushed past this group, and I slipped on my arse, and this voice from nowhere, "Who the fuck is that?" I said, Corporal Graham, sir. They said, "Corporal Graham, you're fucking patrols. What are you doing here? Get up front." That was H. Jones. That's the last time well, it's not the last time I saw him, but it was one of the notable things with H. Jones. He's direct, and what the fuck are you doing? Get up front. So I just instantly slipped on my arse, got up, and it was like, who the fuck are you? And in the dark, so off we went, joined the rest of the company, ended up on Sussex Mountains, which was a range of mountains, and what became San Carlos was in the background. The ships, military ships, supply ships, the Ronin had pulled off by then into safe waters that dropped us off. We were basically strung out, digging in on the hill. So every time we stopped, we dug, for obvious reasons. And it wasn't long before the airstrikes started coming in. There was 5 airborne brigade, which consisted of Guards battalions who had landed the next day. They were way down in the valley. The airstrikes started coming in, and everybody was on their backs at close quarter. They were coming in low, fast, and everybody on their back with, probably 2 battalions on their back, firing GPMG, anything they could get their hands on up into the air, and taking out quite a few aircraft to be going, the slower aircraft, like the Skyhawk, the Pucara, which was a turboprop, and The Skyhawk they were brave guys. They dropped their payload on a regular basis, and most of the time it didn't go off. Historically, now it was down to timers, altitude, experience of bombing missions by the pilots, and so it did very limited damage as they were coming in. Apart from the ships, once they got the Exocet launched in their bombing runs, took out quite a few ships. And looking at the background, you've probably seen the photographs and the paintings and programs in the background, and it was just complete desolation of ships, and everybody's thinking, "What the fuck," And that night, there was plans being drawn up for an advance. We got a couple of ambush missions that didn't come off, but we walked out 10Ks, walked back 10Ks from Sussex Mountains. Second time out, we went out in light order and then got an order through not to come back. So we were in light order, bubble hats, no helmets, no Bergens, no sleeping bag, no rations, just what we had on our belt, out in an ambush because we expected to come back. And we were told to dogleg west to set up a start line at Goosegreen, and the battalion would follow on. So once we got onto the start line, it was a case of my personal experience was crawling forward into Argentinian positions in the mist, in the dark, doing a reconnaissance of gun positions, section positions. We're coming back with information. We got so close to Argentinian positions, some of them were asleep in their sleeping bags, and we were able in the dark, looking through the mist, to plot exactly where the trenches were, the gun trenches, and exactly what kind of capability they had. There were GPMGs in most of the trenches. There was 5.0 Brownings in all of the trenches. Amazing firepower. They weren't terribly alert. We were on several occasions. We could get really, really close. And close enough to cut throats if we chose to. But that's going to compromise their operations. So, people gritting their teeth and pulling back. So once we got back, we passed all this information on to officers, NCOs, and particularly section commanders on which direction to go, how far distances to that particular position, the morale, the state of the enemy, the weaponry, what they were going against, as accurate as we could, and then the young rifle companies would start filing past us. We marked out with individuals the start line as we saw it and the best way to attack, and started shaking hands as they come in, with the guys who were rocking up with fixed bayonets, helmets, light order, and ready to do a silent.
Yeah.
So they advanced forward at a given time.
Sort of our kind of.
And
obviously, I've read quite a lot about the Falklands and Goosegreen. Is it as flat as they kind of say it was in the books? I'd like to do a battlefield tour at some point, but is Goosegreen that flat?
It's there are flat expanses, there are a few hills, but there's nothing on there. Like Darwin Hill, the Ghost Gully. These are sort of notable sort of battle areas. Booker House was like a billiard table. They had to advance through probably 2 kilometers of. They were being engaged from 2Ks away. B Company, and so that was difficult. Goosegreen. There's an approach once you're on Darwin Ridge, Darwin feature. You're looking down onto Goosegreen. So the expanse of land from Darwin Hill to Goosegreen is, you're going downhill, and it is a huge expanse of land. Left, right, forward, and back. And it's flat. There's nothing on there, not a tree, nothing.
Yeah, that is, it is, like I say, I have heard the kind of, I'm hoping at some point I will get to do a kind of battlefield tour of it and kind of
It's
really
worth
get,
it. It's worth it. Yeah,
yeah,
there is people out there that do battlefield tours, but
yeah,
essentially we followed up the rifle companies in the melee, and by that time, I mean, a lot of the Argentinians had green tracer, so it's green and red tracer going everywhere, and more luck than good judgment. Why, how we followed them up right behind them in another position. Whereas it's doing a start line for A company on a closer battle. Well, this one was Wireless Ridge. We did Goosegreen and then Wireless Ridge. But the Goosegreen was fought in daylight rather than at night. The Gorse Gully was fought during the night. The Bucker House was fought during the night, and it's come daylight. Everybody was assembled on Darwin Hill, ready to go for Goosegreen. So that happened during the day. I did a kind of a war walks about 7 years ago.
right,
Back to
okay.
the Falklands, it's called, or Spearhead, or what is it? What's it called now? The producer rebranded it to Fixed Bayonets, and me and a couple of company commanders went out there and did some battlefield tours, and I'll send you a link to it for a look at it.
Yeah,
So you
please do.
could
Yeah.
shortcut, and maybe we can talk again. So, and I did a book, Spearhead Assault, under my stage name, John Geddes. That was okay. That went well, and pretty accurate. So that just outlines, that's just sort of it talks about the same thing as we're talking about now, really, and a lot more depth.
Yeah, I'll post up the links when I put this podcast out, so where they can find the book and stuff like that. I always try and do that for the guest.
Yeah, it's out of print at the moment. I'm looking to, and it's had a contract, so it belongs to us now. And I'd like to relaunch it with some kind of media, audio
Yeah.
book or something like that. Relaunch it. I think we'll try and do that by the summer. It's sort of really quick these days to set that kind of thing up. But it was, it was a hell of an experience. Falklands, really good experience, and it's something that I couldn't imagine being without. If I was of that era and missed it, I don't think I would be a very happy person to carry on in my career.
Yeah, and the Falklands, and I talk about that a lot. Like, there's everything. So for a lot of generations, sort of the generation before me was obviously the Falklands generations. Before that, you had the Aden and the Radfan, and before them, you had Arnhem. So every generation, when I came through, there was still a lot of Falklands veterans knocking around in the depots. So I looked up to the Falklands veterans. You're like heroes and gods to kind of young paratroopers coming through. And then obviously the generations of today probably look back at the kind of Afghan generation, because obviously Afghans now kind of, people aren't out there, in large forces like they have been. So every generation has this kind of era where you look back on and think. And for me, coming through the depot in the mid to late 90s was certainly the Falklands generation that we looked up to, and that's why I love talking to that generation and hearing the Falklands stories. So obviously, kind of, you come back from the Falklands, integrated back into battalion life, and then you kind of had a couple of years, and then you decided to have a crack at selection and go on selection. What did you go on, a summer or a winter selection?
Yeah, I went on the summer selection.
So yeah, obviously you kind of went on selection. How did you find selection? What was the kind of, I suppose I half know the answer. I suppose once you've done combat in the green role, like the Falklands, there's not a lot, and there was a lot of guys that chose to stay in and go on selection, and then a lot of guys got out after the Falklands, because it's like you've done everything you wanted to do as a paratrooper, haven't you? You know, what's the next step after
Yeah.
you've done the Falklands? You know, where do you go? You've done conventional warfare. So obviously your choice was to go on selection. You talked about selection before the Falklands, but obviously you went on in 1984. So how did you find selection?
Well, I mean, it wasn't easy. You know, it wasn't easy, but I just put one foot in front of the other, and I was up there. You know, I was fortunate enough that I didn't get injured, didn't get hurt at all, and kind of enjoyed it in a weird kind of way. And again, it's people falling by the wayside, people moaning about it, back in the bunk that gives you strength. You know, I find that gives me strength. I mean, we with experiences in the patrol company and the Falklands. I mean, we were super fit at the time, and we knew all about selection. We'd seen people go, we'd seen people come back, having not been successful. We saw people coming back successful, packing their bags, you know, and I think it was that kind of what you suggested. You know, I've got as far as I can as a paratrooper. All there is now is rank, and is something like this going to happen again? I had a taste of combat. I think that was why I wanted some more. You know, I wanted some more, and that was the reason really. I wanted to go to 2-2, and also it was a lot more money. You know, as I've always been a bit mercenary, and I just felt I could fit in. You know, better, and so I went to selection and got through. You know.
And what squadron did you end up going to?
D Squadron, Air Troop, 16 Troop, and those guys I knew there anyway, from skydiving sort of circles, and that looked a good place to start.
How long did you spend in 2-2 then before you decided to leave?
13 years.
13 years. So is there anything like kind of during that period of time, was you heavily involved? Because again, across the water in Northern Ireland was still sort of big business for foreign special forces.
Again, my sort of era was Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland, South America, and a lot of stuff I can't waffle about, which is unfortunate. You know, different areas of operation you can, but you know, particularly in Northern Ireland, it's just a hot potato, isn't it? But enough to say, you know, SF out there did a lot of damage, and for the Wokies out there, it's they brought the pirate to their knees, you know, by the late 80s. You know, they couldn't handle the attrition. You know.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
I think you know, particularly the regiment in Northern Ireland, you know, pretty much responsible for getting everybody around the table. You know, the politics did what the politicians did what they did, and the soldiers did what they did on the ground. Not just us, everybody. You know, and our successes was more than they could stand. You know, you just read the history. It's all documented, open source. A lot of these situations are open source.
Yeah, no, fair play. I mean, I know, I have read a lot about the kind of work that 2-2 did. You know, the stuff that you can find and stuff. Because I find it absolutely fascinating, and good reading. You know, so obviously you did your 13 years. We'll skip over the kind of stuff in 2-2 for, like we just said, for obvious reasons. But 13 years. What was the decision, and why was the decision to leave? Was that your time in the military up? Had you done your time, or did you just say, right, I'll fancy something different?
Well, It was several factors. There was a lot of work in the Middle East at the time. The companies like Control Risks at the time, DSL. They were huge companies at the time in London, and it was, I had friends that were outside gaining contracts and making money. So there was a lot of companies out there, contracts in the Middle East, Far East, nice places I was familiar with, and they were offering up really big money. And my time had come to an end. In the, I was 30 on selection, so I was quite old when I joined.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was quite old when I joined. So my sell-by date, if you like, for want of a better word, was a lot shorter than yours would have been if you were in when you were 23, 22, the average. So in the regiment, you got two tiers. You got it's like you got two streams. You got an A stream and a B stream, and that's nothing to do with how good you are. It's to do with your career prospects. You can stay in, and the sort of A streamers go to RSM, they'll go to QM, then probably adjutant, LO type. Not everybody, but a fair amount of people, and that's fine. And the B stream, they are offered the cells, etc. within the regiment. The BG cell at the time, CRW. The designations change all the time down to the operational, the modus operandi. So I was a B streamer, and so with a B stream, you lose control of your career. Yeah, there's no sort of, at the time there was no sort of advancement. You kept your pay but dropped a rank, and then went to something you had no control whether you were going to be bed and storming, sergeant major, or in one of the cells. One of the Gucci cells. So I decided that wasn't going to be me. I was going to get out and be in charge of my own destiny, just like I always have been. And that's when I chose to get out.
Ah, okay. So you go straight into the kind of mercenary kind of stuff, then straight onto contracts overseas.
Straight
What year was this? 97.
97, yeah, 97, 98, all the way up to up to the Gulf War, basically. So a lot of the big companies working Far East, Middle East, and it was known as team jobs in the regiment. It's you go away and you train foreign armies. And that's what we did in as a civvy, except 2-3 times the money at the time, and the work was there and plenty of it. I just really enjoyed it. The Gulf War cracked off. Gulf War II cracked off, and what was that? 2003.
Yeah, 2003. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was something like that, and it was a case of, I noticed contracts opening up in Iraq, and I thought, I fancy some of that. See what's happening over there. So I joined a company called, you're probably familiar with, Olive. Olive was just starting at the time. Some of my friends were directors of the company. I had my own company at the time. It wasn't Ronin. It was a different company, but I was contracted to do a small contract. I had people like Donatella Versace. I had her for a long time, and that was still going strong. And managed that while I was away. I was managing contracts when I was on a contract myself with Olive. I was on their first contract, into Kuwait and north up to Baghdad unarmed. Didn't even have weapons at the time.
Wow.
And those were yet to be appropriated. And that went well. So I stuck with Olive for maybe 18 months, something like that. And at the time, it was all sort of tier one sort of guys out there. Regiment, XSPS, Americans coming in, and then you saw the kind of quality start to diminish. A lot of sort of infantry that didn't know their stuff, sort of people that had been in 6 months or a year and decided to kick it into touch and go to Iraq. It's a bit like people were doing in the early days of Ukraine, and then they started taking sort of civilians,
I
with
remember.
sort of wannabes. And things going wrong. People were starting to get hurt by that. People were starting to get ambushed. I mean, we knew at the time. We knew at the time when we were going in convoy north to Baghdad with the original unarmed olive call sign. We knew an insurgency was the next thing. The place was in shock. There were still bodies and tanks and all kinds of crap all over the place. The place was totally bombed out. People were bombed out. They were in shell shock, and we knew the next thing was going to come was an insurgency, and it wasn't long before it arrived. So I had a lot of quite a lot of experiences out there. I documented a lot of it in another book, Highway to Hell, which was a sort of compilation. It wasn't time critical. It's a bit of it's based on fact, but there's a lot of sort of fiction in there, in as much as timelines are concerned and protecting people, without naming names and too much information about individuals. But the essence of the book is correct, and that went well. And I started looking at close protection training, and I thought, these guys need training. I was going out with on different contracts. I'd left Olive by then. I was with different contracts then, and I was taking on guys that couldn't even shoot straight, And I was insisting with the companies I was working with. Listen, I've got to get these guys on a range, And they said, well, what do you mean? Well, they can't shoot straight. They're not familiar with these weapons, So we get on out in the desert, set some targets out, and the different pistols that weren't British Army issue. The rifles were foreign to these guys, and just started running through basic training, basic CQB on ranges, and getting them some kind of anti-ambush drills, and getting people orientated and organized, ready to go on the road. The last thing you want to, you got to watch your front. You don't need to be watching your back, with the guys that you're working with. So that was the deterioration point. I thought, I'm going to start training. There was one company working in Hereford who was an ex-friend of mine. He was still a friend of mine, ex-regiment. They sold out to Armour Group, but that was the only sort of paramilitary company, as you like, doing that kind of work. And I looked at their program. The CP was great. Field firing was pretty crap. It was just pistols. I thought, I can do better than that. So I threw together Ronin concepts and started looking around for in Eastern Europe where I could get some effective training with foreign weapons and arrange where I could drive on and carry out anti-ambush drills. Ambush was a big thing in Iraq at the time, and people getting whacked left, right, and centre. Sometimes getting away with it, sometimes not. The ones that weren't getting away with it were the guys that weren't trained. So I found the Czech Republic. I had a few years in the Czech Republic. Then I found then I was in Poland. Sort of once I got what I call too old for the cold. Poland's a great place, but it's Baltic. It's Baltic a lot of the year, especially the winter.
My missus is half Polish, so
Yeah, but
she's got a
the
lot of
winters are.
family over there.
Yeah, you know the winter. The winters are cruel. But it was January, September, October. That was the favourite time for guys coming on courses. And I thought, Jesus, and it was just too cold. I found an ex-student got on the phone and said, listen, John, you're looking for a new place. I got this place in with these guys in Florida, in a place called Talon Training, and run by ex sheriff's officers. You got to come out and meet these guys. So me and the missus went out there on a trip. We were buying a house anyway. Bought a nice big pool house in Orlando, and went out, took the wife up there, met these guys, and did some shooting with them. And that was the start of us in America. So we still do stuff in Poland. I restricted to the summer, and winter I try and get out to Florida with my shooting courses, And I think even today there's been a lot of people trying to copy the model of medical training, CP training, and 100% field firing, pistols, rifles, contact drills in the one course, and nobody has managed to sustain that. They send they do the CP training, and they send guys away to Slovenia or Poland. If you've been in business before, you'll know business is a personality. It's personality led, and once you give your group over to somebody else, you lose that personality. And I don't know what those guys are trained. Maybe they're good. Maybe they're not. When it was me and my staff, I know what they're getting, and that is the standard we've stayed. We've kept that for the last 20 years. So we're still here, still running around with guns, still doing CP training in the UK, still doing the medical training, and I should be retiring now because I don't need to work, but I like it. The phone keeps ringing, so what do I do?
Well, look, if you enjoy it, you enjoy it, and keeps you busy, keeps you active, keeps your mind sharp, keeps you physically fit, and it's good to have that kind of purpose and stuff. And you probably hear so many people that retire and then they kind of just got nothing to do, get bored, kind of mental health starts to take effect and stuff like that. While you're busy, and you're keeping your mind active, it can only be a good thing, can't it?
Yeah, I'm so mental. I've just bought a Kawasaki 1000 SX.
Why not?
23
Why
edition.
not? It's only a number, John. It's only a number.
I ride with Foz now, who's an absolute nutcase on his bikes.
Yeah, I quite believe it. Well, that brings me on, obviously, to the couple of stories I mentioned. So about Foz and borrowing a pool car when he went off one night, sneaked off to meet up with your daughter.
Oh yeah, that's right.
He said you weren't happy about that.
No. Called him into the office.
Give him a bollocking.
I saw him rock up in a course car late. If he'd have got in half an hour earlier, I wouldn't have noticed. But he was late, and that pissed me off as well. I thought, what the fuck's he doing in a range car? He came in. I said, Foz, can I have a chat with you? And I said, listen, mate. I've got no control over my daughter's social life, but you don't get to use a range car. All right, use it again. You're off the course. He was like,
yeah, told off like a naughty schoolboy.
Okay. Yeah. But it was good.
Look, it's been my pleasure having you on, John. Thank you very much for sharing your story. It's always a pleasure to have someone from the Airborne Brotherhood on, and a man of your experience and the kind of endeavours that you've got up to over your life. So I really, really appreciate you coming on. But for now, John, thank you very much for coming on.
Yeah, Thank you. It was a pleasure.